All right, so let's start this broadcast with a big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. An alleged attack on Russian President Vladimir Putin has now changed the diplomacy over the war in Ukraine. Russia has now directly accused the United States of America of being the mastermind of the drone attack, the sensational and dramatic drone attack that was witnessed on Kremlin. Now, Moscow has said that Ukraine carried out the attack with 2 drones that were aimed at killing President Vladimir Putin. For its part, though, Ukraine says that it was not responsible for this dramatic drone attack that targeted the seat of power in Russia. The spokesperson of the Kremlin has said that decisions such as these attacks are not made in Kiev, but rather it is Washington which calls the shots in the making of these decisions, and Kiev only executes what it is told to do. Now, earlier, Russia had reported a series of drone attacks on oil facilities and also on train derailments, and it had blamed each of these attacks on Ukraine. Moscow had also warned that it reserves the right to retaliate in the aftermath of every such attack that it says Ukraine carries out. It is 435 days since Russia invaded into Ukraine, and the hostilities have been ongoing ever since. The course of the war, however, has changed dramatically in just the last few hours. Ukraine at this moment is preparing for another counteroffensive, while Russia continues to pound the Ukrainian cities. In the latest shelling on Kherson, it is being said that about 23 people have ended up losing their lives. This was an airstrike on a hypermarket. There was also a missile strike on a railway station and a residential building. According to regional authorities, about 46 people have been injured in these strikes by Russia. Recently, Russia has stepped up its airstrikes across Ukraine as Moscow is expected to reclaim the territory that it ended up losing in Kherson last year. The nightmares of Russian occupation has led to the dozens of residents in Kherson leaving the city. Now, this is what the scene looked like in the last 24 hours, where there were long queues that were witnessed at bus depots with people with their young children desperate to flee from the city because they expect the condition in the city to get worse overnight. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Hague, where he's urged the Russian President Vladimir Putin that he should be brought to justice for his war in Ukraine. The International Criminal Court has also issued an arrest warrant for Putin for the suspected deportation of children from Ukraine. On the other hand, the European Commission has said that another international center for the prosecution of the crime in Ukraine will be set up at The Hague.
Ladies and gentlemen, the war in our country.
To give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is happening at this moment with respect to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we're being joined in by Mr. Maximilian Hess, who is a Russia-Ukraine analyst and also an author. He's joining us live from London this moment. Mr. Hess, thank you very much indeed for taking time out and speaking to us here in WION. The question that I want to start off with is this. You know, we saw the dramatic drone attack that took place over the Kremlin. Russia describes this to be a terror attack that was masterminded by the United States and executed by Ukraine. But Kiev claims that it has got nothing to do with this attack. What are we to make of this?
Thank you for having me. Firstly, it's quite clear that the Kremlin's claims are nonsensical. Firstly, these 2 drone attacks occurred in the middle of the night. Vladimir Putin is known for spending very little time in the Kremlin, and he certainly doesn't walk its walls in the middle of the evening. Secondly, we have seen previously footage posted on Russian social media channels of what are suspected to be Russian anti-war activists flying drones in the area around the Kremlin. These were small commercial drones, not the kind that have been used in major warfare. Those drones have been used on the battlefields to drop grenades and the like, but certainly are not capable of being used in an assassination attempt, certainly in the way that the Kremlin describes. So, you know, exactly who is behind it is unclear. You know, it is quite clear that there have been likely Ukrainian involvement in drone strikes on infrastructure infrastructure near the border with Ukraine, 2 oil refineries in recent days, the 2 trains you mentioned, which were carrying fuel for the Russian war effort. Those are legitimate military targets, given that Russia started this war and has invaded them. But there's no evidence of that in Moscow.
You know, it's very interesting that you say that, the attack that took place at Kremlin could not have been done by the Ukrainians. But the fact is there have been a series of attacks that have been carried out by the Ukrainians which they've not actually claimed. Like the most recent one was at the Sevastopol in Crimea, which was a drone strike that Ukraine carried out. Last year in Crimea at the Saki airbase, there was another drone strike which was most likely carried out by the Ukrainians, although they've not claimed responsibility for it. But is there a reason as to why there could not be a hand of the Ukrainians which may have perhaps wanted to take out the Russian president?
I think that they know that a drone attack in the kind that we saw on video yesterday would be almost impossible to succeed. So that claim from the Kremlin is certainly propaganda. Russian opposition groups, many of which are based in Ukraine and are fighting against Putin, there have claimed responsibility for some of the other attacks. And it is certainly possible that Ukrainian intelligence has been involved in supporting them. Those, again, have been on the border. Just one point about the cases you mentioned in Crimea. Crimea is Ukraine. Those are not attacks on Russian territory.
All right, very interesting. My final question to you is, the Russians are categorically blaming the United States for masterminding these attacks. We've been waiting for the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the spring counteroffensive to begin. So are we to now see these attacks that are taking place on Sevastopol and also in other parts of the front lines of this war as the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is well and truly underway?
No, the Ukrainian counteroffensive that is expected is an infantry and armored assault offensive, potentially to take place in the front in the Donbass or in Zaporozhye, potentially crossings in Kherson. The Ukrainians are very good at keeping operational secrets, which the Russians aren't, so I won't speculate on which of those is the most likely. There may well be that there is an increase in drone attacks around that as well to weaken up the Russian supply lines. I think that's why we've seen oil refineries targeted. We'll probably see more symbolic strikes around Victory Day, the 9th of May, celebrating in both Russia and Ukraine the defeat of Nazi Germany. But the Ukrainian counteroffensive will not consist of drone strikes in Moscow, but attempts to liberate its own territory.
All right, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hess, for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
Thank you for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.